on the internet as well. You are listening to Clubhouse Chatter with myself, Brian Erickson, and here is Norm Ordez.
Hey, that's right. And second and final show of the day, and we have Kurt Bevacqua on the show for the first time. Kurt, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you on a beautiful Sunday morning here in Southern California? You're up in the Northwest, right?
Yes, and it is rainy and windy up here. So, yeah, we might get a little interference with the phones today up here. So, but, yeah, we wish we had the sun.
Well, people understand around the country. I think the weather is pretty nasty.
It is for the most part. And, you know, all things considering, you know, it could be worse up here. And so we've been pretty mild this winter, and so we haven't had hardly any snow, and we've had a lot of pretty nice days up here. So Kurt Bevacqua.
So we've got players across the country that can't wait to get on a plane and go to spring training, which is only 3 weeks away, and there's 40 or 50 well-known free agents that don't even know where they're going.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
Big names, you know, JD Martinez. I mean, yeah, it's weird. It really is weird this year. And so
we'll see what happens.
You know, why do you think that is?
You know, Norm, I think it's a combination of things. I think it is all the analytic guys and the sabermetric guys have put together such a quandary of information. I mean, you can get just about anything that you need to get for a player profile and put it and compare it, and I think they're starting to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm not really positive because I don't work in the front office with a major league club, or I don't work closely enough with analytic and sabermetric guys for the sole purpose of they drive me nuts being around them for more than 10 minutes.
Yes.
But it's, you know, because I'm leaning in that direction, but I'm still old school.
Right.
But I have to admit, they're doing one heck of a job with just doing what they're doing and doing what they're hired to do. I mean, you know, for a major league club to bring in a department, to create a department for something like that, that's got to tell you something right there. Mm-hmm. And it's got to tell you that that's the way the game is leaning. And I think these guys have put together that stuff so well. But I also think that there's other aspects of this issue. And I think one of them is the fact that with this information, they're just not going to give out 7 or 8 or 9 year contract or 10-year contracts anymore.
Right.
I just don't think it's in owners' best interest. Nobody ever asked them to do it in the first place. You know, I had a conversation with Don Fear the other day. Mm-hmm. And he said something to me. He brought up something that Marvin Miller said in one of his first spring training outings with Marvin when he became part of Marvin's staff, which incidentally was only 1 or 2 people. Now Tony Clark runs around with, I think, 51 or something like that.
Wow.
But the one thing that Marvin said that stuck in my mind, I never forgot it. I repeat it every once in a while, and I'm going to do it now. But Don Fear said it to me the other day, and it was amazing to me that here's a guy that ran the Players Association, that's running the NHL Players Association as we speak, was in that position through thick and thin, walked alongside Marvin Miller for years, learned everything that he did, plus the fact that he's as smart as it gets, but yet he's quoting Marvin Miller, and Marvin said one day, and here's what I was talking about, we'll never kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And he was talking about the owners.
Right.
And he was talking about the things that the Players Association were starting to get. And he was talking about going into negotiations with the owners. As the Player Association, as the rep for us, and not asking for too much, knowing that the owners were going to stay firm on stuff. And if they, in fact, had a legitimate beef about what we were asking for, if they'll show us, we're not going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And I got to tell you, that was back probably before free agency.
Wow.
So if you think about him making a statement like that before free agency, before arbitration, which were the two things that the owners never, ever wanted to give up, those were the two things that they were the most afraid of. And it's been proven throughout the course of the years why they were afraid of arbitration, because they would throw in a stupid number, and the players, before there were even agents, were asking for a couple of $100 raises a month, and they were nullifying that. So they were being unfair at the time, but now I think it's swung over. I think it's gotten to the other side. And we don't need $300 million. Well, I say that very selfishly. We don't need $300 million contracts in baseball.
Right.
Why can't a guy sign for a 3 or 4 year contract for $125, $150 million if he's a Bryce Harper type of a guy, or a Manny Machado type of a guy, or even an Eric Hosmer? I think if you're talking about 3 or 4 years for Eric Hosmer, and you're talking in the $20 million range, that's going to get done.
Right.
But the latest thing I hear with him is he's asking for 8 years. I don't know if that's
crazy.
False news or if it's accurate.
That's crazy.
But I'm sorry. I'm not giving Eric Hosmer an 8-year contract.
Right. Right. Make him. What about making him incentive laden? I mean, because back in the day when you guys signed, weren't your contracts incentive heavy?
Well, I wouldn't use the word heavy.
Right.
But there were incentives in them, and I tell you, I've got a great story, and it's for another time, about contracts that were incentivized back then, and this is 77, 78 that I'm speaking of. But I tell you what, if ownership and agents, representatives of the players, would have started out with incentive-laden contracts, I think they would have continued throughout the years like that.
Right.
But instead, they tried to do away with it because it was always the excuse. The manager never wanted to know about an incentive that was in a contract. Because if you think about it, it's not only unfair to him, but it's unfair to the player. Because a manager towards the end of the year might want to start looking at younger players.
Right.
And here he is with a veteran on his staff that's got incentives in his contract. And let's say it was for $100,000. If this guy reaches X number of innings, now the manager's got to start worrying about getting this guy out on the field so that he doesn't cost that player and his family $100,000.
Right.
So I really think it's more on the manager than anything else being unfair. And when managers, the LaRusses of the world and the Whitey Herzogs of the world, started to step into positions to where they knew what was in players' contracts, I think they kind of shied away from those type of things. But I wouldn't mind seeing them. I don't really see anything wrong with them, but I just don't, unless things really go to one side. And what I'm talking about is if the owners, without being proven that they're colluding, which I really don't believe that they are. I think it's just information that they have now that they didn't have in the past, and it's accumulated over the last few years. Now, we might see a blow-up of this thing next year. We're certainly going to with Bryce Harper.
Oh, my gosh. They're talking $400 million.
Well, they were were a year or 2 years ago.
Right.
But are they talking about $400 million now?
You know, that's stupid. I love baseball. I love the game of baseball, but you know, nobody is worth that much money. I mean, because all in all, I mean, in the end, what is a Major League Baseball player? In the end, you're an entertainer. I mean, you're an athlete, but you're also an entertainer. And I don't, you know, we got firefighters and our military. They're not getting paid what they're worth, but yet we got a ball player. We're talking about $400 million. I mean, come on. You know, I think that's wrong.
Well, I mean, it's certainly wrong when you use the analogy that you just used, because we know that all our public servants are underpaid. It's the way it is. It's the way it's always been. And unless changes are made, it's going to continue to be that way.
Right.
But when you're talking about somebody that's a performer, and you look at the amount of money that the Jay-Z and the Beyoncés of the world are making, and that other people in the entertainment industry are making, and you look and you see that there's a rapper that's interested in buying an NFL team. You look and you see where there are announcers on the MLB network that are flying around in private planes.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not being paid for, and I'm not throwing out names for a reason here, because I think it's unfair. But there's a whole hell of a lot of money being thrown around somewhere for a guy that has a show on the NFL network, on the MLB network, that every time I see him going around on social media, he's in a private plane. I mean, this guy must have made some unbelievable investments when he was playing. And he came into the scene probably around the 90s, the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So he was there during the course of the big money, but he wasn't the kind of player that's going to get $5 million a year.
Right, exactly.
So
I think I know who you're talking about.
Example.
Absolutely, and yeah, I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about. But no, I agree. I mean, you know, it's crazy, and you know, don't get me wrong. This guy really cracks me up. I love him, and but
he cracks me up.
He's hilarious. But it's true though. You're like, every time you look on social media, he's either on a golf course or in a private plane.
And you know what? Good for him.
Absolutely. You know, absolutely.
So and there's no jealousy here on my part. Man, maybe a little bit, but there's really not a whole lot of jealousy on my part. I can't tell you that I don't wish that I was playing today, because certainly the salary structure and the 2-week paycheck that everybody draws at the major league level is a hell of a lot better today than it used to be.
Right.
But it's just the way it is. I mean, it's a sign of the times. I would like to see the players get more recognized by not only the players, but also the Players Association, of the things that the guys in the past have done.
Right.
And I just don't think it's there as much as you should be. And I think the Players Association should represent minor leaguers too.
That could be a good thing.
Point where that needs to happen.
You know, yeah. and as we know, you know, there's still always talk of what a minor league baseball player earns. And I mean, it goes back to when you guys were in minor league baseball. You guys didn't earn crap unless you were a bonus baby. You know. But, you know, minor leagues, you know, baseball's a glamorous lifestyle. It really is. But it's also not a glamorous lifestyle. It's not what people think it is. And there's a lot of money in the major leagues thrown around. But to get to that point, to be a major leaguer, there isn't a lot of money thrown around. You know, unless you're a bonus baby, and you know, you got 6, 7, 8 guys living to an apartment, and you know, $500-$600 a paycheck to just to make it, I mean, a lot of those guys are just barely making it.
I'm glad you threw that number out, because you throw that number out and people look at you like you're an alien.
Mm-hmm.
But let's think of $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month. Let's say a minor league player at the AA level is making $2,000 a month, and there's probably very few that are.
Right.
They only work for 5 months a year.
Yep.
That's $10,000.
And that's way under the poverty level.
But yet they're expected to report to spring training a month and a half or 2 months before the season starts. They're expected to train and go through and attend functions and things like that the club might offer throughout the course of the winter, play winter ball. And that's the way I survived.
Right.
From 1970 to 1980, I played baseball all year round. And from 1972, which is the first year that I played in the big leagues, until 1980, I was on a major league roster for 95% of the time. But yet I went, as soon as the season was over, and started playing winter ball down in one of the Caribbean countries, because I needed not only the experience, but I also needed the money.
Mm-hmm.
So, people look at winter ball as an advancement. Clubs ask you to go and play winter ball at times.
Right.
And then in order to play, you used to have to get permission. Because it's a contract thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, when I first signed, I was binded to the Cincinnati Reds for my whole life. Now, did I know that? Did it sink in that deep that when I was so excited and so proud of myself and so happy about being scouted to sign a professional contract, and I'm putting my signature on it, the thought didn't even enter my mind that, hey, 4 years down the road, if these guys don't treat me well, or if I don't go up in the ranks like I think I should, I can't do anything. We never thought about that. But that's the way it was.
Right.
Until Marvin came along. For that guy not to be in the Hall of Fame is an injustice to the game of baseball.
I agree.
So now we want to segue to the Hall of Fame deal?
Absolutely. So we've got the Hall of Fame, of course, they're going to be releasing the new Hall of Fame names here probably in a couple weeks, I think. Actually, I think it's coming up this week, isn't it? Holy cow.
Coming up in 3 days.
Yeah. And so there's talk.
Yep.
There's talk of, okay, we already know that most likely there's going to be 5 new Hall of Famers. And so that's going to leave like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens looking from the outside. Now, their numbers are getting higher. They're getting close. And within the next 5 years, it is very possible that one or both of those guys make the Hall of Fame. Now, there's no doubt that numbers-wise, they belong in the Hall of Fame. But as one of the older school players, do they belong in the Hall of Fame because of the PEDs? I mean, we've already got, dead PEDs back when we were playing. Back when you were playing, there were different things. But do they belong? There's people in there now that have been suspected.
If I was in the Hall of Fame, I probably would think differently than I do.
Right.
But I think that the steroid era was so widespread, and I think it's much closer to all the things that Jose Canseco said than the opposite. I think they ought to start to forget about it like they have. Because if we remember back at the beginning, Mark McGwire was taking, I'm trying to remember the name of that.
Andro,
that's
yeah.
it. And that wasn't a banned substance at the beginning, I don't think.
It wasn't.
And how can you punish a guy for taking a substance that's not banned,
mm-hmm.
that all of a sudden he starts doing crazy super things, and they look at it and go, well, wait a second, it shouldn't be like this. And why did they do it in the first place? And then why did, after the 94-95 strike, where the World Series was lost, to pump up the game a couple of years after that when it was the McGwire and Socia show and everybody started to hit home runs and the game got back to where everybody wanted it to be, and we've got a commissioner sitting in the office that's taken all the accolades for everything that's going on in the game, when if there was a monkey sitting in there, he would have been getting accolades also.
Right.
So I don't know what's fair and what's not fair, but certainly I think we're starting to see it swing to the other side.
I agree. I think
the thing that bothers me about the Hall of Fame voting is the way it's done with the people that vote.
Right.
I think there should be mandatory amount of names put on the ballot every year. And what that number is, let them get together and figure it out. I know it's 10 now, and
right.
I'm not saying that should be the number. But when I see a guy with a Hall of Fame vote for Tomei and Vizquel, and they're the only two guys on his ballot, and he's a Cleveland writer, I think that's stupid.
That's wrong. Absolutely.
It is, and it's bias, and you can see it, and it's obvious.
And there's a lot of that going on.
There absolutely is. But how do you stop that?
Right.
And that's the thing that's difficult. I'd have to really sit down and think, because when I see that happen, I think to myself, that guy should have his voting rights taken away.
Right.
And then you think about it a few minutes later and you go, well, that's not really fair, because this guy got to see those two players play 81 games a year, every single year for 15 years. I don't blame him for feeling the way he does. So I really don't know what the other side is, but I think it should be that you have to vote for a certain number of guys every year, or not vote for a certain number of guys every year. I mean, how did Vladdy jump up so high in the Hall of Fame vote this year?
That's a good question. And I was a huge Vladimir Guerrero fan, but
me too.
I think about it, I don't necessarily think of Vladdy as a Hall of Famer. I mean, I don't, but I mean, when you look at the numbers, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
I never looked at him as a Hall of Famer until last year, when all the hype started up, and he received a decent percentage of the vote.
Right.
But for him, I don't know where he is right now, but for him to be in a 90 percentile bracket is ridiculous.
Yeah, he's one of the five.
In my mind. I mean, when I think of the Tom Seavers and the Tony Gwynns and the George Bretts, and players like that receiving 90%, and even some of them not receiving votes to go into the Hall of Fame on their first ballot just because of the fact that it was the first ballot.
Right.
That's the problem that I have with the Hall of Fame voting. So it's it's going to continue to be a topic of conversation for as long as it's there.
And
That's the one good thing about our job.
And it's so fascinating. I mean, it really is fascinating on what or how people are thinking. You know, like I said, Vladimir Guerrero, 90%. I mean, come on. I don't know. And you know, with that said, you know, I've got a couple of other names that I'd like to throw out to you. And the first one is, so I grew up in Idaho, and we grew up with WTBS. So everybody grew up Atlanta Braves fans. And, of course, Dale Murphy, growing up, Dale Murphy was my favorite player. But I'm on the borderline with Dale Murphy as a Hall of Famer. I mean, there was no question that Dale Murphy was one of the best players in the early 80s. If not the best. I mean, he won 2 Most Valuable Player awards. But the question is did he sustain that long enough to be considered a Hall of Famer?
Well, the answer, if you're asking me if I think Dale Murphy should be in the Hall of Fame, my answer is no.
Okay.
And the reason I say that, and Dale falls into the same category as a whole hell of a lot of players, if you were to ask me about whether or not they should be in the Hall of Fame, is that I think those halls should only have a plaque of the greatest players that ever played the game. They've made it a media circus every year now.
And that's fair. That is true. Absolutely.
And I think that it's become a showcase for Cooperstown, for Major League Baseball, and for the Hall of Fame. And in some cases, deservingly so. But for them to start drumming up names from 30 years ago and trying to make a case for certain players that didn't even come close into voting for such a long time, and then all of a sudden, this guy should be there. I mean, it's just all politics.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons that Vladdy has jumped up so high in the voting this year, is just because of everybody talking about it. If I can't wait. I actually have the ability to go in and see who's voting this year. But next year, the votes become public.
Nice.
I can't wait to see the changes that are made with people when the voting gets made. And I'm not talking about the Rosenthals and the Nightingales of the world. Those guys will come out and tell you who they're voting for.
Right.
Because they know the game. They know the game.
But there's a lot of people to hide behind that pin.
Oh, big time.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't wait to see what the situation is next year when it becomes a matter of public record on who voted for who. And the thing that just drives me up a wall is, how can you vote for a guy one year and leave him off the ballot the next year?
Yep.
Now, you'll say, well, maybe you voted, maybe there was 5 guys that came that he thought it was a better player. Okay, that's fine. But how many years do you have where there's 5 guys that come eligible that should take the place of a guy that you voted for the Hall of Fame the year before?
Yeah,
and I'm talking about a guy that's got 60+%. I'm not talking about a guy that you voted for because, you got married to his brother-in-law, his cousin, and you want to do him a favor just to see him on the ballot.
Right.
I tried to get Phil Collier to vote for me in San Diego my first year eligibility. As good of friends as we were, I couldn't talk him into it.
So with that said, you mentioned, guys 30 years ago. The last guy I want, and you played with Veda Pinson, and there's his son he's got a little campaign out to try to get him, elected into the Hall of Fame. Is Veda a Hall of Famer in your mind?
No.
Great player. He was a great player. But I didn't get to watch him. I've seen footage of him, and I've heard about him in the stats, and he was a great player, a good player, but a Hall of Famer, I don't know.
How many plaques are in the Hall of Fame?
Just
player just players? Because I really don't know the answer to that question. Shame on me.
I don't know the answer to that question either. I mean, there's a lot, but there's not a lot. And so, I don't know. And
whatever the number is, there's too many.
Right. So
now you probably know my position on a lot of the names that are going to come out, because I think there's guys that have been elected that shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
Right. Absolutely. When I think of Hall of Fame, I think of guys like, Hank Aaron, the older guys, Ty Cobb. There's some people that don't think he belongs because of his character, but Hank Aaron, Vada Pinson, I don't know. There's no comparison, I don't think. Hank Aaron is.
Well, there's not, and I think it's I think it's unfair to compare those two guys, and I think it's probably why there's the ability to elect people, because they put certain players at such a high esteem that is it fair to put everybody else at that level in order for them to have entrance in the Cooperstown? And my answer to that is yes. Absolutely, it's yes. Mm-hmm. Whether you're a position player or a pitcher. The first guys that were elected there, they didn't have these big events every year for guys to be elected into Cooperstown, and now they're putting a lot of other people in different classes in, which are fine. Some of them might deserve to go in. But when it comes to the players, that's the thing that they're really making the biggest deal about. And, it's an extravaganza every year. And it is for the game. It certainly is for the club that player is going to go in with. And it just makes for a lot more revenue coming into the coffers of Major League Baseball.
Right.
Which I think it would be very unfair of me to say I think that plays a part, because I'm not sure if it does. I think there's enough money out there where that's not the thought process. But it's just, it's gotten to where it's just too much now.
Mm-hmm. You hit .412 in the 1984 World Series.
How can I not be in the Hall of Fame?
You were unconscious in that World Series. Talk a little bit about that World Series. You hit .412 with 2 home runs, and what was that like? You were in a zone like no other.
Yeah, I was swinging about well, and it was, I look back on my career, and I remember early on, and I tell people all the time about making that 230-mile drive from North Miami, Florida to Tampa to report to the Tampa Tarpons when I first signed, and being so excited and not knowing what to expect. And when I took the field and I looked around and I started seeing ground balls being caught and throws being made and pitchers warming up on the mound, I went, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Because these guys were good. And I think from that point on, with the exception of the streaks that I had, especially in AA, especially going through AAA at times, I wasn't a 100% confident player. And I think if a lot of players were honest if they were asked this question, I think you'll find that even guys that are in the Hall of Fame probably felt the same way. And it wasn't until probably 1977 that I really felt like I belonged and I was confident enough to take the field against whomever it might be and be able to get it done. So for all of those years, with the exception of sometimes, if confidence is a result of success.
Yep.
And naturally, when you go through a period where you have a little success, you're a lot more confident. But then, as soon as that success starts to wane a little bit, you lose that confidence. But the more success you have, the higher the confidence level stays.
Right.
And that's what happened after, I think, the 77 year. 76, 77, and from that point on. So, going into the World Series, I mean, we had shocked the world by beating the Cubs in the playoffs. Yeah. And we were just riding a testosterone high. And the city of San Diego reacting the way they did back then. And all the players being the kind of team that we were, where we had each other's back. It was a crazy fun time. And it went by in the blink of an eye. Before you knew it, it was over. And as much as time stands still sometimes, and there were periods, I had asked Garv before the World Series even started. We were working out one day, and I said, "When you hit that home run off of Lee Smith, what was it like running around the bases?" And he said, "KB, it was like I was in a vacuum." And I experienced the same exact thing, the way he described it, when I hit that home run in Game 2 to put us ahead and eventually win the game a few innings later. People ask me all the time, when you jumped up in the air towards first base or you put your arm up in the air around in second. I don't remember doing any of those things. I remember first hitting the ball and starting to run to first, and then about halfway down to first base, it's a vacuum. But I do remember starting to round third base and seeing Ozzie Virgil's face and giving him a high five, and that's where it kind of came back. But it's a hell of an experience. I mean, it really is.
That vacuum has been explained to me before, and what, some people explain it to like, the big moments, in their career, like rounding first base. You start thinking back to when you were in Little League, and you talk about going into the minor leagues, and people, they say that vacuum is kind of, sometimes they just flash back to their younger years.
Yeah, I didn't, I don't remember going back to my Little League days or anything like that, but that's too much to ask my brain to do. But it was, it certainly, all does come around like that, because normally during the World Series or during big games like that, you're surrounded by people that got you there.
Right.
And, you know, my parents were there. And, you know, everybody that had supported me were either there or, you know, watching the game. So, you know, you do go back to, you know, those years. I mean, I got calls from people that I hadn't heard from in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my high school days.
Wow.
Asking for tickets. Which I found very amusing.
Right. You haven't spoke to me in 20 years, 15 years, or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hey.
So it's an experience that I wish everyone had the opportunity to go through. I mean, I know that's impossible.
Right.
But it's best explained the way that I just tried to do it, because that's basically the way it was. And it's just so much fun. And what makes that happen to somebody that wasn't a great player, like stat-wise and all of that, you know, I think some people just rise to the occasion. And I like to think of myself as that kind of player, especially in the latter part of my career that I talked about earlier, when I started to get confident. I had a pretty damn good idea what a pitcher was going to throw in certain situations in the game. And you learn that just from watching.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, if you watch a major league pitcher, and it doesn't matter who they are, they're not going to get beat in a game situation with their second and third best pitch. So whatever that pitcher's best pitch is, and there's not too many out there that can rely on 2 and 3 pitches.
Right.
But whatever that pitcher's best pitch is, that's what you're going to get thrown if the game's on the line. And fortunately for me, there were a lot of times where I was put into the game in a pinch hit situation with the game on the line. So it didn't matter whether I was facing Nolan Ryan or Bruce Sutter or Kent Colby. I had a pretty damn good idea what I was going to get. Are you going to go up against Nolan Ryan and look for a curveball?
No, absolutely not.
And for anybody to do that, they're an idiot.
Yep.
And it's the same way with anybody else that can throw 95 plus. To look for a breaking ball is ludicrous, especially when the game's on the line in the 8th or 9th inning. So I think that mentality, right or wrong, made me a much better hitter in those situations. And it made for the confidence level for me to become a better hitter in certain situations, and the World Series is certainly one of them.
Man, you played in a great era, a great time. And, you know, I remember, you know, growing up in Kimberly, Idaho, you know, Sanford and Son was on, and then Atlanta Braves baseball came on, and you were one of the guys who I would watch. And, you know, I remember, you know, things I remember about you is the mustache, the show stash. And we talked about, you know, you were also the bubblegum blowing champion. I still remember that as a kid. And, you know, the card that came out with the big old bubble. And Kurt Bevacqua is our guest. And, you know, you just take me back to a great time. And thanks for coming on the show today.
You know, I'm going to try to renew a bubblegum blowing contest.
We need it. But But we only can use Bazooka.
I'm going to start my own podcast on February 2nd.
Are you?
And I am. And I want, and I've talked to my producers about doing a bubblegum blowing contest on social media. And then getting MLB involved because they need younger fans.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They need interest from that age group. And I think it's something that could work. I don't know whether we're going to do it just in one town at the beginning, but I did call Tops last year. They had absolutely no interest at all.
Huh.
And I said, fine.
Somebody's got interest.
If you remember right, it was the Bazooka.
Yeah, it was. It was the Bazooka. And now I think Double Bubble is the actual gum in the dugouts, the actual buckets. Now I think Double Bubble is the gum. I'm not sure who
it is.
I'm not sure if that's Bazooka or a Bazooka product or what, but yeah, no, that's a great idea. That's a fun idea.
Yeah, I get a lot of pictures from both adults and children on on my Twitter and Facebook page of them blowing bubbles. They send them to me.
That's awesome.
Wanting a little competition.
Right.
It's all fun. It's all good stuff.
Well, I'm excited to hear.
That was fun.
I'm excited to hear about your podcast. Can't wait for that to come out. And hey, let's do this again soon.
Well, let's do it.
And so once again,
let's do it. Dirty Kurt's dugout.
Dirty Kurt's dugout. We like it. So once again, Mr. Kurt Bevacqua. Kurt, thank you, and hey, enjoy that sunny SoCal day today.
Thank you, guys. You enjoy it up there, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. Have a good one. All right. Once again, Mr. Kurt Bevacqua, and Brian doing his thing here, and so Facebook Live, Brian, man.
And everybody else, we're still streaming live.
Kurt's awesome. Kurt was good.
He's awesome.
Kurt was awesome.
Love it.
So, Kurt Bevacqua, he wasn't a star by any means, but he was a guy that you could count on coming off the bench. Pinch runner, pinch hitter, if you needed a glove out there. And that's how he made his career, besides hitting .412 in the World Series, against the Detroit Tigers. That was awesome. I remember that. San Diego's first World Series, their only World Series.
A win's always good, and that's the time to do it.
That's right.
Stepping up.
Hey, Brian Erickson, I'm Norm Ordez. We are Clubhouse Chatter. We are sponsored by Baseballism, baseballism.com. We are also sponsored by Northwest Independent Baseball League. Dwayne is looking for players coming up for the season in April, so get a hold of them. BaseByDudes.com. Chris Gazelle there in Vancouver, Washington. Also sponsored by Base by Pros, Mitch Canham. His dad, Mark Canham, does our shirts for us, MDM Design. We stream live. Well, we're streaming live Facebook now and always at yamhilltoday.com. Shoot me an email, normbo18@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, iTunes. We're everywhere. Pretty much. Type in Clubhouse Chatter, and you'll see a ton of shows. Brian, you got anything else to add before we take off?
No, not a thing. How's that for an answer?
Not a thing. Hey,
not a thing.
We got some football on today, the NFC and AFC championships. Brian is taking the Jaguars and the Eagles. I'm taking the Vikings and the Patriots.
Jaguars? Okay.
Really? You know what? It's just one step closer to baseball season. That's the way I look at it. So,
okay.
All
right. I can't wait to talk about our schedule this baseball season, by the way.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, by the way.
Yeah.
I will have the outfield on in 2018. That is my goal for this show for this year is is to have the outfield on?
By December 31st, 2018.
That is what I would want, and of course,
Not going to happen.
It'll happen, Brian.
All right.
It'll happen. Hey, I had Rupert Holmes on.
If you like pina coladas,
That was a good one.
Rupert, I still listen to that one.
That one is your favorite.
We got to say goodbye.
Hey, I'm Brian. That's Norm. We are Clubhouse Chatter. Have a good weekend.
He's messed up, folks. Have a good day.